Welcome back. This is the first time I push out a long-term review on a camera because I didn't feel like it for a long time. But now I feel I can talk to you about the X-T4 after 1 year of heavy use. And I know the title says after 1 year, but I also know that the camera was pushed out basically 2 years ago. But for me, I jumped on the X-T4 bandwagon a year later because I was in love with my X-T3. I was loving my X-T3. I was loving the way it helped me getting better at what I was doing. And again, the X-T3 was love at first sight. The moment I bought it is the moment when I started loving that freaking camera. That was so good. And it's one of those situations where you meet someone you barely know and immediately fall for him or her. And this was the X-T3 for me. With the X-T4, it was a completely different approach. Actually, it took me a while to understand the camera. Basically, maybe the camera was different enough from the X-T3 to surprise me. I was expecting a seamless transition, and for whatever reason, it wasn't. Eventually, after a few months of heavy use as a main camera for pretty much everything, then I started to understand the camera and I started to love this camera even more than I loved my X-T3. In this case, it's one of those situations where you know someone, you don't really get along with each other very well, but then for whatever reason, you force working together, spending time together, you become friends, and then only after you start falling in love with that person. I hope the analogy between falling in love with someone makes sense to you when it comes to understanding how I felt about the X-T3 and the X-T4. From a build quality standpoint, there's not much to say about this camera. This camera is great. This has been my main camera for pretty much everything that I have done, from personal snapshots, call it whatever you want, candid, whatever, to professional shooting, from videos to photos, from the heat of the summer in Sicily to the extreme cold winter in Lapland. I brought it everywhere, and this camera has never failed on me once. It has always been a trusted companion for whatever I was doing, and this says a lot because cameras nowadays are very complicated, and being very complicated, they are subjected to temporary failures, hiccups, they froze at times. The X-T4 never did anything like that to me, and it's been very reliable for 1 year. I can fully trust the camera. I even dropped it twice, and it's my fault because I didn't check the proper that the tripod mount was secured enough. But the camera didn't break a sweat. It barely has signs of that. So it is built that good. And on top of that, compared to other cameras, the shutter is super silent. It is rated for 300,000 shots, which is a lot. And in general, the camera is engineered to very, very high standards. And my experience with the camera was simply incredible. It has never failed me once, and I've used it a lot. The only thing that I would change from a construction standpoint are basically the rubber flappy things where you get your connections on the left of the camera, because I think the X-T3 implementation with the door you could remove was a lot better, and it didn't get in the way, because even if the X-T3 had the flippy screen, you could remove the door, so it wouldn't have got in the way. And the lack of dedicated headphone jack, so you can monitor your audio. Now, for me, I don't do it that much, so it's only a minor issue, but I know others rely on that a lot, and having a dedicated jack would help a lot. And one minor things, the micro HDMI, it would have been better to be a full-size HDMI. But again, I don't use it that much, so for me personally, it's not a big deal. When it comes to the control and the way the camera operates, it is very similar to the previous iteration of the camera, meaning the X-T3, X-T2, and whatever. But at the same time, it is different, and it's different enough to make quite a big difference. I think like the controls, the dials and all that are all Fuji users are used to those, and we want those to stay. And they made this ones so that you can also lock them, both the ISO and the shutter, so you don't mess around with it if you don't want to, and that is great. And these are the things that stayed, and the overall look and feel of the camera pretty much stayed. But they improved the grip. Again, it's not super big. It could have been a little bit bigger, but they improved it. But they also added a few major changes. They make the camera somehow very different from its predecessors. One of them is the monitor. Now, we all know that the X-T4 came out finally with a flippy screen, and we all asked Fuji to do something like that. At the same time, though, when the X-T4 got launched, a lot of people were complaining about the way the screen worked, because from a photography standpoint, it kind of got in the way. Now, don't get me wrong, but I was in that same bandwagon. I thought that the way I was using the X-T3 monitor was easier to operate when it came to standing behind the camera, whether it was for video or stills. Although I have to admit that the way the X-T4 implementation allows for more extreme super low shots or super high shots. But other than that, in general, especially from a photography standpoint, the X-T3 implementation of the monitor was easier to use and easier to get used to. Of course, when it comes to video, especially if you're doing stuff like that, the X-T4 is recording me, that flippy screen makes a whole lot of a difference. So there's good and bad, but I'm starting to love the way this one is done. But it took me a while, and I think that was the reason why a lot of people were complaining about the screen. Now, there was a solution to that, and Fuji had that solution because they did it on the X-T100, a cheaper camera, but they made it in a way that it would hinge up and down in the same axis of the lens if you want it, but then it could flip around. The same thing, made in a more premium way, is in the Panasonic S1H, I guess. So there was a way to make everybody happy. Another great addition to the control is a simple one, but it's a very, very major change. And this is the introduction of the switch between stills and video. That single switch, together with the fact that it triggers different menus with different options, and it basically changes the entire overall way of how the camera works, that switch is enough for a hybrid photo video shooter to switch from an X-T3 to an X-T4. That's how good that switch is, and what it comes with that switch. Again, the different menus, the different Q button, the different way of controlling the settings. I personally set the camera so that when I'm shooting stills, I'm using the controls on the physical controls on the top of the camera, so that I can quickly have a glance of what I'm doing without diving in the menu. At the same time, when I'm shooting video, I'm using the front and back wheels to change all the parameters, including ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. The possibility of doing this gives us the best of both worlds, and I really love this, and I really love what Fuji did from this standpoint. It's perfect for hybrid shooting. When it comes to photography, the X-T3 already had all of what I needed but the IBIS and a longer lasting battery, and the X-T4 added the IBIS and a better battery. So from a photographic standpoint, this camera, to me, at least for what I need, is basically perfect, because it gets me all the tools that I need, has a very high image quality, a great dynamic range, and it's the Fuji color science that we all love, all in a package that keeps the same layout of its previous models, but adding the IBIS and a better battery. on top of a silent shutter that is very useful in many scenarios, an increased frame per second burst with the mechanical shutter, which is 15 FPS, which is probably way more than many people need. And you can also go to 30 FPS when it comes to electronic shutter with a crop in sport mode. But the addition of the IBIS is the really game changer when it comes to photography, because the IBIS is so good that you can get crazy long shutter speed with non-stabilized lenses that you couldn't even think of in the past. It is that good that sometimes, unless you're looking for super long exposures, but you can leave your tripod home and just trust the IBIS with non-stabilized lens, or the combination of IBIS and stabilized lens to get crazy long shutter speed. Even something like a tenth of a second on a 70-300 at 300 millimeters. It is great. It is something you wouldn't be able to do before. Or almost 1 second with the 10-24 at 10 millimeters, stuff that I have done and I would not expect to be able to do. So the IBIS is basically a phenomenal tool. The sensor in general is super good. It's really good. And even when you're using electronic shutter, you don't get rolling shutter. I mean, you get it, but it's probably one of the best sensors around, at least for APS-C, that you can get, because it controls the rolling shutter really good. For my use, the megapixel count is really good. It is perfect for what I need. I don't really need more resolution, as it would mean a lot more storage to deal with on a daily basis. And we all know that storage is getting harder to deal with, especially when you start using videos and photos. So for me, my megapixel count, it is perfect. I can still print huge prints with it without any issue. Now, when it comes to autofocus, the autofocus is great, especially if we're talking about single point autofocus. This is probably one of the best cameras around. Not for the price, one of the best cameras around in general, because it's fast, although the speed depends quite a bit on the lenses that you have. But with the more modern lenses, super fast, and it's very precise, and it doesn't fail on you. When it comes to continuous autofocus, that's where the camera is still really good for stills, but it's not as confident and as precise as more advanced systems such as Sony's real-time tracking, Canon dual pixel AF, and the latest Nikon iteration of continuous autofocus. If you think about 4 or 5 years ago, thinking that Fuji was going to become a major player in the mirrorless video market was kind of hilarious. No one would have thought that Fuji was going to be a major player. But yet, here we are today. Things started changing with the X-H1, but the big boost came with the X-T3 and its incredible capabilities in a body that was well built. It cost only $1,500. That's where things changed when it comes to video with Fujifilm. The X-T4 added, as we all know, the flip screen, the IBIS, a better battery, and a few more options. It's stuff that we've asked Fuji for a long time, and we got all of those. From a video standpoint, the footage that comes out of this camera, we probably know that already, is great. It's one of the best around. It's really good. The highlight roll-off is incredible. The possibility of shooting H.265 10-bit internal is really pleasing. It's really good, solid footage. You can shoot all intra at up to 400 megabit per second, although it eats your storage pretty quickly. But again, it's an option. You can use 200 or 100 depending on what you have to do. The 4K 60 is there, and it just has a minimal crop, and the 1080 goes up to 240 frames per second, which is great, although the quality drops a little bit compared to the 120. But when you need it, the option is there, and it's not bad. I mean, it's better on the 120, but it's not better than the 240. We can talk about specs for years, but bottom line, it's a pleasure to use the X-T4 when it comes to video, especially as a hybrid camera. You're doing photos and videos, and you're doing it as a one-man band. Where the X-T4 lags behind the competition is the continuous autofocus in video. The tracking autofocus in video. Unfortunately, there are the modern systems from Sony, Canon, Nikon are all doing better, and especially because they are more reliable. You can trust them a lot more than you can do with the Fuji system, especially again when it comes to tracking, face tracking, object tracking, and all of that. Not only the X-T4 system is less reliable, as it sees faces when there's no faces. Sometimes it's in the trees or in the background, and it just jumps on those faces without a reason, and it does happen on me quite a few times. But it's also less intuitive when it comes to tracking something that is not a face, because you don't get to choose what to track. You either track a face or you get your subject into your square for the continuous autofocus, and you just have to keep it there. While other systems allow you to track a specific object that you select in the frame. Another issue that I face with video, despite again loving the camera, is that with the IBIS, while it's perfect when it comes to stills, it's not as good when it comes to video. Not because it's not good on its own, because when you're trying to use it, trying to avoid using a tripod, the IBIS does a really great job, especially when you start using the boost option and the electronic stabilization, which crops in a little bit, but gives you a really nice and stable shot. That's where it does its job perfectly. But when it comes to deliberate movement, when it comes to panning or stuff like that, you can always see that the sensor starts fighting the movement and only then tries to catch up super quickly when it realizes that it's lagging behind. And this, when it comes to video, is annoying because it is not pleasing to look at. Now, knowing how it works, you can somehow fight that. You just have to get used to it. But where you cannot do anything about is the way it interacts with stabilized lenses. When you combine together the stabilization of the sensor and the lenses, what happens is that with wide-angle lenses, it introduces a lot of warpiness in the corners, stuff that basically, in my opinion, is the combination of IBIS, lens stabilization, and lens correction, which is hard to fix in post. But sometimes even with the 70-300, I found that it kind of wobbles even in the center. I don't know how to describe it. You've seen it on the video. And that's annoying. And stuff like that doesn't happen with a camera such as the X-T4. So I assume that is mainly due to the IBIS. In conclusion, as a tech guy, knowing the shortcomings of this camera, I always looked around for valid alternatives. But for the price, nothing comes close to what the X-T4 can do with a mix of portability and hybridness of shooting features and overall quality. And let me tell you, I don't care about the full frame look and all of that. I've used full frames in the past when I was shooting weddings almost a decade ago. That means I'm getting old, but never mind that. I was using D700s and a lot of nice glass, but I don't miss that. Don't get me wrong, I don't miss that at all. Now, I know there are better cameras around in general, but they all cost a lot more, especially if you factor the lenses in it. The Sony a7 IV is a great option, but it's $1,000 more than the X-T4, and the 4K 60 is cropped with a 1.5 factor, while the 4K 60 in the Fuji is 1.1. So you're not changing the focal length of the lens when you're using the Fuji, but you're losing a lot of crop when you're using 4K 60 with the Sony. And I use 4K 60 a lot, so to me it makes a lot of a difference. Sure, the Canon R6 is great, but again, it costs $1,000 more, give or take, and you're losing some resolution when it comes to the photographic capability of the lens. Again, not a big deal, but still it's more expensive. And when you start factoring in the price of the lenses, the size of the lenses, it's quite a bit of a difference. Same, the Z6 II, same thing. It is costs a lot more, has the same limitation of the Sony A7 IV, and lenses are even bigger and more expensive than the Sony's. Yes, the Micro Four Thirds system is a compelling option, but again, the GX6 is more of a video camera than a hybrid camera, and when it comes to stills, it loses some to the X-T4, and the other solutions don't look appealing to me. So in general, what I'm saying is, for the price, there's nothing that compares, even despite being 2 years old, to the X-T4 today. Of course, if I was rich, or if I could justify the price of an Sony A1 or Z9 or R3 or R5, the conversation would have been completely different, but I don't. For what I do, I cannot afford spending 4, 5, 6, 7,000 euros on a camera. It doesn't make any sense for me, so I cannot justify that, let alone lenses, because lenses is another chapter when it comes to costs, size and weight that make a lot of a difference. So bottom line, despite not being perfect, this camera is still the best hybrid combination you can get in that price range. And there's no competition at all. Like, all the competition forces you to spend a lot more. What would I change? I won't tell you now. Why? Because I plan on doing my next video. I'm not planning on doing. My next video is going to be on what we know and what I expect from the X-H2 and X-H2S, which are the next cameras that Fuji is going to launch, because those cameras are going to define Fuji's future with the X system. Because if they nail those, they're going to make waves. If they don't nail those, Fuji system may have a very troubled future. If you made it so far, thank you so much. Don't forget to subscribe. If you want to see more of my videos, leave me a like. Let me know in the comments below what do you think about what I just said. And what else? Nothing. Ciao, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.